back to Binkerbelle's Yarning. Today is Wednesday, August 21st, which means that it is a We Learn Wednesday. So today is actually a very appropriate day for this particular topic for me anyways. We're going to discuss crochet and knitting as therapy. So I have high functioning depression and a generalized anxiety disorder, as well as chronic pain caused by fibromyalgia. And knitting and crochet are often what I go to when my symptoms are pretty bad. So as therapy, knitting and crochet and other yarn crafts are often used as occupational therapy. Occupational therapy is a course of treatment where patients with illnesses and disabilities, through therapeutic use of everyday activities, develop, recover, and improve their skills needed for daily living and work. So that's the official definition of it. Basically, occupational therapy is exploring how day-to-day activities, hobbies, exercise, and the such help you to move forward in your road to recovery. It's used for everything from patients with mental illnesses to patients with physical illnesses, injuries, and the like. It's used across the board. So when it comes to knitting and crochet, as occupational therapy, it actually improves motor skills and cognitive abilities and allows the body to heal in more than one way. So it allows you the relaxation needed for the physical body to heal, as well as the space in your head to allow you to move forward in becoming better or feeling okay again in a mental illness. It helps reduce stress, anxiety, and depression, retain cognitive brain function, and physical dexterity. Occupational therapy has used crafting to treat the mentally ill until about World War I, when it was adapted to treat returning combat veterans. So people who had what they called shell shock back then, or PTSD, they have used that crafting and yarn art or yarn crafting to treat patients like that quite a bit, especially when it comes to disassociation, where they take leave of themselves. It helps them focus better. Anyways, through the 80s and 90s, it was dropped from most occupational therapy programs because the benefits couldn't be physically measured in the same way as drawing or bouncing a ball, for example. In 2007, the Harvard Medical School Mind and Body Institute discovered that knitting and crochet lowers heart rate by an average of 11 beats per minute and induces a enhanced state of calm. So there's your measurable levels. And yay for Harvard for really pushing forward in that. It also found that in some practices it can add to lowering blood pressure and eventually reduce the cortisol levels. So cortisol levels is what pushes you towards higher blood pressure. It increases self-esteem and self-worth by providing a sense of accomplishment. So that we all know that. You always feel really good when you've completed a project or a really difficult thing, or when you're starting a new project. It's always very exciting. So in 2009, a study showed that 72% of anorexic women yarn crafting daily led to a decrease in rumination. So rumination is when you the same thoughts go over and over and over and over in your head. You fixate on what you said or what you did or something like that, and it just keeps going over in your mind, and you keep berating yourself for it. And with this decrease in rumination, it led to higher rates of progress in therapy. A 2011 study at the Mayo Clinic of 1,300 people aged 70 to 89, of whom all were cognitively normal, so they didn't have any dementia or Alzheimer's, found that those who took part in knitting and crochet had diminished chances of developing mild cognitive impairment, and memory loss. So by knitting and crocheting, people are actually able to avoid severe memory loss and cognitive ability loss, which is always fantastic. The reason for this actually is because knitting and crochet activates the parts of the brain that control memory and attention span. So you have to remember how to do your stitches, and you have to and you really have to be able to count and stuff like that. So there is that wonderful aspect of it. When a person with onset dementia partook in the activities, the progression of the illness was slowed as much as 50%. But the catcher to that one was the people that took part and saw these positive results actually knew how to knit or crochet before they had the onset of dementia. So it's a good idea to learn to crochet before, or knit before you start to develop these particular ones. So knitting and crochet also relieves and reduces depression, which is actually one of the most reported benefits. So the repetition of knitting and crochet releases serotonin, which is your happy hormone in your brain, which is also a natural antidepressant. So that's why you feel happy or content when you're working on a project. A study of more than 3,500 yarn crafters published in the British Journal of Occupational Therapy showed 81% of respondents with depression reported feeling happy after knitting or crocheting. So there you go. The simple act of choosing colors and patterns can be a decision-making task that might be a big victory on a difficult day. So difficult days are very difficult. They're very hard. Getting out of bed, doing basic activities, taking care of oneself, taking care of one's house, just day-to-day functions. Those can be very difficult days. So being able to choose a color scheme and a pattern for that color scheme, or a color scheme for a pattern, it feels like a victory because you've made a decision, you've done something. It brings a sense of purpose and achievement. So it actually increases your self-worth and your self-esteem because you're like, I accomplished this, I was able to do this. It helps fight loneliness and increase sense of usefulness and reduce isolation. So depression often brings feelings of isolation and loneliness because you're not able to get out and do things. You're not able to contribute to the lives of your family, to your own life itself. But being able to knit and crochet, it reduces that because you think about who you're making the item for. If you're making for anybody, it gives you feelings of inclusion because you know there are others out there that are working on this craft as well. You're able to connect with them easier now through social media, which is fantastic. So you feel like you're part of a community when you don't actually have to be socially active with these people or leave your house, which is fantastic. It also reduces anxiety by helping keep the hands busy and the mind focused. So it keeps you away from that continued rumination because you're focusing on something specific. It also increases the confidence to attend classes and events when you have social anxiety. So when you feel really confident and proficient at something, and then you go to a class or you go to a meeting with people that also do this particular activity, you feel confident enough to actually interact with them. It brings the mind to a calmer place, and again, because that rumination, that continuous over and over and over and over in the mind, it pushes that out because you have to focus on something. You have to count, you have to read, you have to really focus on something. The counting of the stitches helps OCD patients by providing a acceptable outlet. So the counting of stitches helps satisfy that OCD need, and it moves the mind away from other repetitive tasks that might not be as healthy. People with dissociative identity disorder. Now, this is what I mentioned before. When they started treating war veterans, with PTSD. So one of the symptoms of PTSD is disassociation or dissociative identity disorder, and that's where the mind leaves the body. So part of the brain makes a person think that they're somewhere else, reliving an activity or reliving a part of their past, and they believe that that's where they are, whereas they're not. They're here in the now. By providing them with the tools and the skills to do knit and crochet, it forces them to continue to stay focused and on the here and now, so they don't give their brain that chance to disassociate. So any activity that allows them to stay focused and not to drift and let their brain wander, let their mind wander, reduces any incidence of having a disassociation. It also increases a feeling of usefulness by building new skills, give a feeling of productiveness, and provides a useful way to give to others. So, giving things to people make you feel good. It makes you feel useful. It makes you feel like you've contributed to their lives in some way. So by knitting and crocheting, you can actually put your feelings and your love and all of that into the piece that you're making for that person, and you feel more connected to them. And then you see the appreciation that they have and the love that they have for the piece that you made, and it really gives you that self-confidence boost and that increase in self-esteem. It focuses the brain on soft, soothing, easy repetitiveness, which allows the person to wind down and prepare for sleep. So this is talking about insomnia. One of the symptoms of depression and anxiety is often insomnia. I know I suffer from it. It loops between insomnia and hypersomnia. So insomnia is when you can't sleep. Hypersomnia is where you want to sleep all the time. You're exhausted despite the fact that you've just had 10 or 12 hours of sleep. So the repetitiveness and the soothingness of the activity actually helps you wind down and relax and get ready for sleep. Herbert Benson of the Mind and Body Medical Institute found that 100% of patients with insomnia reported improved sleep, and 90% were able to eliminate medication when Yarncraft was included in their therapy programs. So that's how calming it is, that's how relaxing it is. It just lets you wind down, settle down, and focus on something that's very repetitive. It's kind of like counting sheep. It reduces irritability and restlessness and helps keep mood balanced by reducing cabin fever and boredom. So that goes back to that sense of loneliness and the need to feel inclusive. A lot of patients that have anxiety disorders and depression have problems leaving their homes, so they develop an agoraphobia. And by doing knitting and crochet, the procurement of supplies for it, yes, we have internet, and yes, you can order online now, but it also gives you an opportunity to go out in the world, and even if it's just to the yarn store, to pick colors and textures and whatnot for your projects. It's also used in grief therapy. So this is another big one. Grief is hard. It's very difficult, especially when you already have mental illnesses. Losing somebody is never easy, ever. But feelings of grief, especially when they're associated with remorse or guilt, they totally wreak havoc on your mental illness, like on your mental capacities. When you have a mental illness, it's just amplified because it adds into that rumination, it adds into that feeling of uselessness, because there's nothing you could do, despite the fact that there probably was nothing you could do. It's not something that is consciously thought. It's an unconscious thought that bounces around in the mind. A lot of the thoughts that come with anxiety and depression, they're not purposeful. They just pop in. It's like being in a big room, well, not even a big room, a little room that's locked. It has a big black sucking hole in the middle of it, and there's voices that just bounce around the room telling you that you're not worth anything, you'll never amount to anything, putting out paranoias that are totally unfounded, that panic because you can't get out and you can't escape it, and all you want to do is get out, and leave what's going on in this horrible, horrible place, but you can't. And then you just become so tired of fighting with them that you feel overwhelmed, and it's just the cycle just continues. One feeds the other, and when you throw grief into that, it just amplifies everything, and it increases those thoughts of uselessness and the inability to control what's going on in your life. So often yarn crafting is used as in grief therapy because it gives you something to do that does not require you to get out of bed or put your clothes on, and that's the other thing with depression. Just the act of getting out of bed and getting dressed can be very, very difficult. But this, you don't have to get out of bed, you don't have to put your clothes on, but you can still be active, you can still be doing something. The other thing when it comes to helping with grief is it can be done a little bit at a time. So you don't have to sit down and do it for hours on end. You do a little bit here, a little bit there, and you still have that sense of accomplishment. It allows you to take your mind off the pain of loss. So it lets you be somewhere else for a while. So focusing on the yarn colors, textures, as well as the repetitiveness creating the stitches allows you to get through one more day. Which is important because it's one step at a time, it's one day at a time, it's a process, it's nothing that's going to happen overnight. It's literally one step at a time for any mental illness, for any illnesses in general. It's one day, one step. The other one is chronic pain. So I have chronic pain due to fibromyalgia, and day-to-day activities can be very difficult sometimes, especially when the pain is bad. But allowing me to knit and crochet gives me that calmness, that relaxation, even when my body is hurting. It relieves the feelings of depression that are often associated with chronic pain. It also engages the mind, body, and emotions that often distract you from the pain. So when my hands are bad, I wear my compression gloves, and I go slow. I use bigger hooks, I use thicker yarn, I go slower, I take my time, I take lots of breaks, but the simple act of doing it relaxes me, which in turn relaxes my muscles, which reduces tension and whatnot. And as I had said before, it actually it produces serotonin because you feel good about what you're doing. You're enjoying what you're doing, so your brain is putting out serotonin, and serotonin is not only a natural antidepressant, but it's also a natural pain reliever. So when you're relaxed and you're happy, the pain is reduced. Now, it's not going to necessarily get rid of your pain, but it does help with the treatment of it. So that's my story. Feel free to share your stories and how knitting and crochet has helped you. There's plenty of resources out there if you need more information. I put some links in the description from the resources I used to get the information about studies. Yeah, feel free to comment. If you want to share your story via video, then send it to me via email at binkerbellesyarning@gmail.com, or go ahead and post it in our Facebook group. I'd love to really hear and see what you guys get out of knitting and crocheting. All right, we'll see you tomorrow for Nifty Things Thursday.